I would love for, if you're looking for a church home to worship with you, to serve with you, please let us know. We'd love to be able to visit with you about those things. Visitors, there's also a white card on the back of the pew in front of you. If you wouldn't mind, grab one of those and fill it out. You can just leave it right there on the pew. We'd love to have a record of your attendance, but hope that you'll stay around for a few minutes after our services so we can get a chance to get to know you. I do want to say it's good to see the entire Hackney clan back with us together. Avery home safe and secure from his trip to Ukraine. Look forward to hearing all about that work as time goes on. As we talk this morning about Isaiah 53, let me say by introduction this. Isn't it remarkable that God doesn't do things the way that we expect Him to? Isn't it amazing that God, in His wisdom and in His own way, is able to make something amazing and beautiful, even though it's not the way we would have done it? You know, the best our scientists have when they look at the world and all that's in it is that these things that we see have evolved over millions and billions of years and have just kind of formed themselves. They've came into the earth and all that's in it, and the order that we see around us just happened. And yet at the same time, God makes simple what a man alone can't understand. In Genesis 1 and 2, it says God did it and God created it within 6 days. When you talk about how God creates a nation, nobody would have taken a man like Abram and Sarai, his wife, in Genesis chapter 12 and said, you know, these two who are both advanced in years, long past the age of childbearing, these two ought to be the ones that ought to be the father and the mother of a Jewish nation, of a nation that God is going to redeem. When you talk about redemption and you talk about Israel coming out of Egypt, who in the world would have picked an 80-year-old man? It seems like Moses would have been a better fit as a deliverer whenever he was 40 and he killed that Egyptian for beating two of his Hebrew brethren. But God chose Moses, and He chose Moses after He had spent time in the wilderness dealing with stubborn sheep, so that Moses could deal in the wilderness with stubborn sheep. But when we talk about Jesus, and we talk about the plan of salvation that God has orchestrated through Jesus, I don't know that there's any one of us that would have done it the way that God did. But what we find in Isaiah 52 and Isaiah 53, I believe more than any other passage, perhaps in the Old Testament or even in the New Testament, is God's heart fully on display. God's heart fully on display. Isaiah 52, beginning in verse 13, going all the way through chapter 53, is what we know as one of Isaiah's servant songs. You see, the Israelites, the Jews who would have read this, would have recognized that this psalm, or this song that's being sung by Isaiah, is messianic. It has to do with Jesus, it has to do with a king, it has to do with somebody that God is going to raise up. But what the Jews thought about this song is that this referred to the Jewish nation. That they were going to go through suffering, they're going to go through hardship, just like what you read about there in Isaiah 53. And they were going to go through those things collectively as a people, and Isaiah 52 and 53 is a metaphor for the entire Jewish nation. See, because they couldn't imagine their Messiah was going to be one who would suffer the way that is talking about here in Isaiah 53. They couldn't imagine that. And yet, with all the beauty and all the artistry of Psalm 53, of Isaiah 53, what I believe we're doing is we're glimpsing into God's heart. Yes, it is beautiful just as a passage. You remember that as the Ethiopian nobleman was riding along in Acts chapter 8 and he was reading from this passage, he realized that it was talking about an individual, but what Isaiah 53 reveals about Jesus, about the Savior, is that He has not come to conquer by force, but rather that He has come to redeem through His suffering. As you look at this passage, you see the beauty of the fact that God doesn't do things the way that we might. And you see the way that God is going to bring about His chosen king, but it's not going to be through pomp and circumstance. It's not going to be through the royal actions that we think of with regard to a king appearing on the scene. And as we go through this morning, I just want us to notice some words through each section of this great hymn or this great song. And as we're looking at this song, I want us to know that we're seeing God's heart on display. Let's look together at this psalm just for a few minutes as we make some observations about the way that God does things. Looking at the suffering servant as revealed here, What we notice first is that he is glorified even though people don't understand. God doesn't do things the way that we do. He's glorified, but nobody understood. Notice firstly that he is identified. Beginning of verse 13, it says, "My servant. Behold, my servant." And we know that we're still dealing with the same person because all the way down in chapter 53, verse 11, you have "my righteous servant." So whatever this is saying about Jesus, about the servant that God is going to bring about, is that he is going to be one who is going to prosper. He is going to succeed. The word where it says, "my servant shall deal wisely," is literally, my servant's going to succeed. But as he succeeds, he's also going to succeed unexpectedly. Notice the astonishing terms. Verse 14, as God reveals who his servant is. Many were astonished, verse 14. Verse 15, "Kings shall shut their mouths at him." Verse 53, chapter 53, verse 1, "Who has believed our report?" Who has believed our report? God is going to bring about something amazing, and he's not going to do it the way that people are going to do so. In fact, he's going to succeed even though it says there in verse 14 and 15 that his visage, his person is going to be marred more than any man. And you're going to tell me that God has chosen him, God has chosen that in order to bring about his salvation? You know, all the way through, Jesus succeeds from his life through a banner of astonishment. There's a banner of astonishment over everything that happens with regard to Jesus' life. Here's this Jewish preacher that just appears on the scene, going from place to place, preaching about the kingdom, who's gained a small amount of followers. And you look into his background and you realize that he wasn't born with some kingly, princely house. He was born and put in a manger there in a stable. And as he's going through his life, you find that as he's doing miracles, constantly people are going, "This man is the great power of God," and yet he's telling people, don't tell anybody about this. Don't tell anybody about the miracle that I just did for you. And in fact, as they try and look at him and say, "This is a man we want to be our king," every time they try and make him king by force, you know what Jesus does? He goes and he hides himself. Every time that they get close to this point where they're going to make him a king, he's turning away from it. Until the closest time, I believe, is on that crucifixion week, on that Passover week, where he comes into Jerusalem riding on a colt, and people are laying down their garments and their palm branches, and they're crying out to him, "Hosanna to the Son of David." That's a kingly title, and Jesus fully accepts it. But as he goes into the city of Jerusalem, those Jews are so stirred up that they cry out for him to be crucified. And every turn, Pilate comes back and says, "I find no fault in this man." And the Jews say, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate says, "Shall I crucify your king?" The Jews say, "We have no king but Caesar." From the very first time that Jesus appears on the scene, until the very time that he exits from this life, he is behaving as a king. But people are looking at this going, "I don't get it. I don't get it." So much so that Isaiah says, "Kings shall shut their mouths at him." I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall on the day Paul talked to King Agrippa. And Paul stood there and made a testimony and a defense about why he was being arrested, but even more so about the hope that Jesus gave through the resurrection. Don't you know that after Paul was done, there was probably a moment of silence before Agrippa finally said, "Paul, you almost persuade me to become a Christian." As Paul stood before Felix and reasoned with him about righteousness and self-control and the judgment to come, don't you know Felix sat there just for a moment and thought, until he said, "Go away from me, and I'm going to call for you in a different time." I wonder, as Paul stood before Caesar, the most powerful man in that day, and gave a testimony of why it was that he was suffering, if Caesar sat there silently. Kings will shut their mouths at him. They're going to see, but they're going to say, "That's not the behavior that I would have expected out of a king." He's glorified, but nobody understood. Notice from Isaiah 53 now, he's revealed, but nobody regarded him. He was revealed, but nobody regarded him. Who has believed our report? Isaiah 53 begins. You know, when those wise men show up in Matthew chapter 2, and they show up in Jerusalem and saying, "Where is the king? Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we've seen his star in the east." You remember that Herod and all of Jerusalem was upstirred, and they began to search through, and they say, well, it's supposed to be in Bethlehem. Those wise men were the only ones that went and saw it. Here's this one that the Jews have been expecting all the way since the days of the prophecies that were made. And here they are, that they have these wise men who have observed the sky and observed the signs, and they realize he's already been born. And they're the only ones that go and seek. Who's believed? Who's believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Notice, as he begins to describe the characteristics of this king, he starts out by saying who this one is not. There is no beauty, there is no, in the New King James, comeliness or majesty. And when we see him, there's no beauty or handsomeness that we should desire him. You know, people, when they were thinking about the king, they wanted somebody as handsome as Saul, somebody as rich as Solomon, and somebody as well-loved as David. Jesus was none of those things on this earth. He wasn't as handsome as Saul. He wasn't as rich as Solomon. He wasn't as well-loved as David. But what he is, as he goes through and talks about this in verse 3, is despised. The word is vile, scorned, rejected. He's treated as a transient, a man of pain and sorrow in heart. He is stricken, afflicted by God. He's got the disease of grief, literally. And what humanity did, what we did, as Jesus has revealed, is we hid, as it were, our faces from him. There's a couple of reasons why people might hide their faces from somebody. I think about Matt Vale taking his family through the line at the local Burger King. And the lady on the other side of the drive-thru says, "Sir, would you like fries?" And Matt says, "Absolutely, those fries be bussin'." Don't you know that his kids are doing this in embarrassment? That's one possible reason why people might hide their face. Another possible reason is that sometimes people want to hide their face because they don't want to be recognized. You ever see somebody that you're not really excited to see, and you kind of do one of these and you're walking this way as fast as you can? You don't want them to look at you, and you don't want them to pay attention to you because you don't want to engage in a conversation with them. And yet I also wonder if some of the teachings of Jesus made his disciples a little antsy. Particularly in passages like Matthew 15, where Jesus speaks about the Pharisees and says, from the prophet Isaiah, "In vain do these people worship me, teaching his doctrines, the commandments of men." And his disciples maybe stand in the background going, "You shouldn't be saying," until the point where they come by Jesus and they say, "Jesus, don't you know that they were offended that you said those things? Don't you know that in John chapter 6, where Jesus is talking about somebody and saying, if they don't eat my flesh and drink my blood, they have no part of me?" And his disciples kind of stand in the background going, "I'd like to melt into the wall or melt into the ground if I could." There's things about Jesus that, as he's revealed, cause the people there on that day to hide their faces in embarrassment, to want to avoid him and not be singled out by him and not know that they're anywhere near him. And there's some things that Jesus revealed that certainly were uncomfortable for the people that heard them. He's revealed, but nobody regarded him. Notice who else is the suffering servant. God's heart on display. He is one who is atoning, but nobody recognized. He's atoning, but nobody recognized. And notice that as we talk about the third-person pronouns, the we, us, and the he, him of Jesus, it's all about what he is doing for us. In fact, what he did for us is, verse 4, he carried our griefs. He's borne our griefs. He's carried our sorrows. But we esteemed him stricken, held in contempt, stricken, punished by God, afflicted. He carried those things for us, even though we're looking at him and going, there's something wrong with this guy. He did those things instead of us. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was pierced through. He was bruised for our iniquities, crushed and broken. The chastisement for our peace was upon him. The discipline and correction that we should have received, he did. And by his stripes, we are healed. Every blow Jesus received, every slash of the whip, every blow to the face, he did because you deserved it and because I deserved it. He did that instead of us. But he did that because of us. Isaiah says, all we like sheep have gone astray. We've all turned aside, everyone to his own way. And notice, the Lord has laid upon him the iniquity of us all. The perversity, the depravity, the wickedness, and the consequences that befall somebody like that, God did because of you and because of me. The suffering servant suffered. God's heart on display. He's atoning. He's carrying that for us so that God would accept us. And yet there's nobody that recognized that. Notice, number 4, he is condemned, but there's nobody that pleaded his cause. How did he do it? How did he carry it? There's an emphasis in this section on the lamb, but there's also an emphasis on the silence of that lamb. Jesus carried what he carried unjustly. Jesus heard the accusations. Jesus didn't answer the accusations. In fact, Pilate at one point says, don't you hear how many things that they're accusing you of? Don't you understand that this is a capital offense? Don't you understand that I can put you to death for this? But Jesus opened not his mouth, so much so that Pilate was astonished that he didn't say one word in defense of himself. He didn't say one answer to those accusations that those Jews made. He kept his mouth shut. In fact, 3 times in the text, he emphasized that he opened not his mouth. He carried it silently. Where he went were to unjust trials. There was an unjust trial before the Jews. They did so in the middle of the night. That was a no-no in the Jewish books. They did that under the cover of darkness. They did that before a Gentile court, before Pilate. And both Jews and Gentiles were complicit in Jesus going to the cross. But he went so unjustly. There was not a single accusation that those people could have made that would have stuck. And yet, because they hated him so much, they sent him to the cross. And where they put him, well, they put him in the grave with the wicked, but the rich at his death. Who's going to declare his generation, Isaiah asked. Because he'd done no violence, nor was deceit in his mouth, he was not like us. Putting his grave with the wicked and the rich with his death, Jesus died with 2 thieves, one on the right hand, one on the left hand. And yet at his death, he was put in the grave of Joseph of Arimathea, a new grave, a new tomb where nobody had lied. You know, Jesus died as a wicked man, or as a wicked man, in the picture of what Isaiah is picturing here. But when they Pilate sealed the seal on the tomb, isn't it funny that the Jews asked for a guard to be able to put around him because they knew that he said that he was going to rise on the 3rd day? You know, we go to state funerals, or have you ever seen those state funerals where somebody's lying in state? And you have all the pomp and circumstance of the mourners coming and passing by and things like that, but there's always some kind of guard there. Isn't it funny that Jesus, if he was as harmless as they thought that he was, if he had just tried to carry away the nation and yet at the same time they thought that it was all over, why did they take the time to put the official signet on the tomb? Why did they take the time to put a guard just in case somebody was going to come and roll away that massive stone? His grave was made with the rich at his death. And yet everything in this instance and in this picture wants to cry out, don't you know, don't you realize what's been done? Don't you realize the difficulty that here's somebody who's condemned, and there wasn't somebody that said, don't you know this man's innocent? All of his disciples fled from him. Why did God do it? It pleased God. It pleased the Lord to bruise, to crush, to shatter him, to make his soul an offering for sin. He shall see his seed, that is, there's results. He shall prolong his days, That tells me that death is not the end for the suffering servant. The pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. And because Jesus was fully invested in the will of God, God was not going to leave him in that grave. The heart of God on display is that Jesus was condemned, and yet there was nobody who pled for him. Last point this morning. Jesus is exalted, but he shares the blessing of his exaltation. What he is he's satisfied. He's satisfied, verse 11. He shall see the labor of his soul, and he shall be satisfied. His work is done. God's purpose is done. As Jesus died on that cross, he cried out, "It is finished." It is finished. He was satisfied by the work, by the redemptive work. But what he does now is he justifies. By his knowledge, the righteous one shall make righteous, just as he ought to be in the eyes of God, because he bears the wickedness and the punishment that's due. And because of that, what he shares is the victory with all of us. Therefore, I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong. Because he poured out his soul unto death, he's numbered with the transgressors, bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Jesus didn't go to the cross for his own sake. Jesus went to the cross so that you can say, and you can sing like we just did, "In Christ alone my hope is found. He is my light, my strength, my song." That Jesus is the victory that we have. He did that for you, and he did that for me. I mentioned at the very first, and all the way through the lesson, the wonder of Isaiah 53 is glimpsing into God's own heart and realizing we see a Savior who didn't come and conquer by military force like the Jews thought that their Messiah was going to do. Instead, what he did was he came and he redeemed through suffering. What do you see? Did you see God's heart? Because it's right there in Isaiah 52 and 53. Let me help. He was glorified, but no one understands. He was revealed, but nobody regarded him. He was atoning, but nobody recognized. He was condemned, and nobody pleaded for him. He was exalted so he could share the blessings. Do you see God's heart? Because in every beat of Isaiah 53, we see God's grace shown to us. God's grace shown to us. And for those who look and see the suffering servant and realize who he is, we are the ones who recognize that he was glorified, and we understand. We recognize that he was revealed, and we want to pay attention to that. We want to pay attention to him in the way God revealed him. We look and we see that he bore the sins of us. He bore our weights. He carried our sorrows. And we want to pay attention to that because we realize he is the only sacrifice for sins. And as he went to the cross and he was crucified, we now plead for him. I need Jesus. I need Jesus. I need him both as my atoning sacrifice, but I also need Jesus, and I need to share him with other people because he is the one who sits at the right hand of God, exalted above every name that's ever been named or ever will be named, and he's the one that shares the blessings with us. God's grace, God's heart is on display in Isaiah 53. And brothers and sisters, we are the recipients of God's grace, and as a world around us celebrates the resurrection on a day like today, the question is, do they really understand? Do they really regard? Do they really appreciate? Do they really want to plead for Jesus? Are they really recipients of his blessings? If you know, does God's heart show in your life? And does God's heart show in my life? God's heart on display is Isaiah 53 in a nutshell. And the question is, brothers and sisters, do you know him this morning? Are you following him this morning? Do you have his atoning sacrifice as your plea on the day of judgment? Every day, does his blood cleanse you from all unrighteousness, as 1 John 1, verse 7 and 9 says? Are you living every day in appreciation for that sacrifice? If not, change. If we can help you to do so, please let us know. If you're ready to receive the forgiveness of your sins,